Have you ever looked at someone in charge and wondered, with an uneasy mix of disbelief and fascination, how in the world did that person get the crown? We keep seeing people who seem lost steering giant ships, emperors who watch cities burn, startup stars who sell smoke, politicians who shout slogans so loud they drown doubt. At first glance, it feels like a cosmic joke. Yet if we look through the eyes of psychiatrist Carl Jung, a different picture appears. Under the noise plays a hidden drama of archetypes, shadows, and unlived dreams. Power, in Jung's view, is not simply grabbed by the loudest voice. It is offered by collective psyches hungry to meet their own unconscious needs. When a culture hands its throne to an unprepared ruler, that ruler often mirrors a part of the people they have pushed away. What looks like stupidity at the top is really a story about the darkness we refuse to face. Jung taught that every person wears a mask, the persona, shaped to fit family, school, work, nation. The mask lets us move through society without revealing everything inside. Nothing is wrong with that. The persona is a useful tool, like clothing. Trouble starts when the mask hardens into our only face. Then other parts of the psyche, the anxious child, the hidden rebel, the wounded dreamer, sink out of sight. Jung called this submerged material the shadow. It never dies. It waits, storing energy, eager to slip out whenever the conscious mind relaxes its guard. When we meet someone who boldly shows what we have buried, we feel a magnetic pull. We may call that person a leader, a genius, or a monster. But in truth, we are meeting our own exiled qualities in living form. Think of Nero, the young Roman emperor who indulged every passion while Rome smoldered. To his critics, he was clueless, even mad. From a Jungian angle, Nero carried Rome's repressed instinctual life. The Republic had bragged of discipline and civic duty. Nero paraded the opposite, living the wild urges many citizens secretly envied. Their projection fed his throne. Jump to a modern boardroom. A founder promises miracles with perfect poise. The device does not work. The science is fog. Yet investors cheer. Reporters swoon. Employees chant slogans. The crowd is not hypnotized by raw ability. It is enchanted by its own projected dream of effortless brilliance. Here, Jung's idea of psychological types explains why genuine intelligence can be a handicap in the theater of influence. People with a thinking, intuitive bent weigh options, entertain doubts, speak in grays. They heed the inner signal that whispers, "Hold on, there is more here." Meanwhile, a sensation extrovert type, tuned to appearance and quick reward, strides forward with firm gestures and short sentences. Crowds select leaders the way eyes pick bright colors in a dark room. Bold outlines win. The careful thinker sounds unsure. The certainty dealer feels like solid ground to anxious ears. Jung warned that when persona stretches too far from the authentic core, the individual risks collapse. Yet on the climb to power, an oversized persona can work like a shiny costume. The candidate cries, "Only I can fix it," and people, starved for clarity, breathe relief. In that moment, the collective psyche strikes a bargain. We will lend you our faith if you carry our uncertainty. The leader's swagger is borrowed energy from the crowd. Once enthroned, though, the persona must dodge honest mirrors. Competent advisors threaten it because they hold up reality. Loyal echoes replace skilled voices, and the organization turns into a hall of reflections showing just one face. The modern Dunning-Kruger graph tells the same story. The person who knows little feels sure because there is no inner debate. Doubt lives in the shadow, out of sight. The expert has met the shadow, tasted failure, learned to speak with complexity. So competence often looks hesitant, while ignorance looks bold. Crowds confuse humility with weakness, and certainty with wisdom. Now add Jung's collective unconscious, the deep store of symbols that every culture inherits. Each society tells the tale of the hero, the savior, the wise king. When life grows confusing, we ache to see those figures made flesh. Enter the charismatic yet unprepared speaker who claims special destiny. He waves a flag, quotes a myth, poses like the warrior on old coins. We rush to fill him with the power of the hero archetype, ignoring hints that the substance is missing. Jung called this inflation, ego swelling with archetypal force not earned by inner work. Inflation feels grand from inside and looks like arrogance from outside, yet it stays fragile and must chase applause to stay afloat. Jung also offered a path forward: individuation, the lifelong labor of bringing the shadow into light. A person who owns their darker impulses is harder to fool and tougher to idolize. They have met the trickster within and recognize him when he prances across a stage. They can applaud vision while checking facts, admire confidence while measuring results. On a larger scale, a citizenry devoted to individuation would withdraw the fuel that inflates incompetent rulers. It would prize honest self-knowledge over shiny masks, complexity over slogans, shared responsibility over blind projection. But individuation is hard, and societies rarely walk that road together unless crisis forces reflection. Meanwhile, incompetent leaders use ancient psychological tricks. They split the world into good tribe and evil tribe, stirring the shadow of the other. They shout, "Those people are the threat," and the collective shadow leaps outward, painting strangers with our buried fears. The leader then poses as the hero guarding the tribe from its own darkness, an inner civil war acted out on the public stage. Pause and look inward. When have you felt a wave of hope for someone who promised impossibly simple answers? That surge was not silly. It was archetypal energy seeking a vessel. If we do not claim that energy, someone else will. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To resist incompetent rule, we must befriend our own darkness, our craving for certainty, our irritation with complexity. Otherwise, we remain children waiting for rescue, and the loudest imposter will gladly play the parent. Consider the moral dimension that Jung called the voice of the self, the deeper center that longs for wholeness. When a leader hunts power without listening to that voice, morality shrinks to pure convenience. Promises become costumes, discarded the moment they pinch. A ruler aligned with the self speaks fewer promises but keeps them, because they rise from inner necessity, not crowd hunger. Such alignment rarely looks flashy. It may seem quiet, even plain. Yet its calm coherence builds trust that grows stronger, not weaker, under scrutiny. Think of your own workplace meeting where probing questions earn polite smiles and quick subject changes. That tension is the small version of this wider story. Shallowness shields fragile masks, while honest depth calls the shadow into the open and risks real change. Jung would advise, hold your ground, speak with clarity, yet expect resistance at first. Truth rattles inflated systems before it heals them. When an unskilled ruler fills the palace with even less skilled aides, Jung would say we are watching the shadow reproduce itself. The insecure monarch projects weakness outward, then hires that projection in human form, a cabinet of mirrors reflecting his own denied incapacity. Each time he promotes a flatterer over a truth-teller, he enjoys a momentary relief. My secret doubt is gone. Look, no one around me seems better. Yet the psyche does not erase doubt so cheaply. It simply pushes it deeper. The organization soon behaves like a single neurotic mind, avoiding honest feedback the way an anxious patient avoids painful memories. Budgets swell, data bends, public reports sparkle with false confidence, and the body politic mimics a person gripped by denial. Jung compared such systemic avoidance to a complex, a knot of emotion that hijacks clear thought. Complexes thrive in silence. They unravel only when spoken aloud. That is why robust institutions insist on open debate and independent review. They perform, at scale, the analytic task of bringing complexes to consciousness. Crowds, too, have complexes. In times of fear, a nation may form a savior complex, yearning for a parent figure to soothe uncertainty. The savior appears, echoing the people's own unspoken wish. Simple answers, sharp borders, glorious futures. Because the wish is collective, the speaker feels larger than life. He is not merely one person. He is an animated piece of the national unconscious. Reasoning alone cannot puncture that glamour. To reach the spellbound crowd, we must address the need beneath the spell, the wound that made easy promises feel necessary. Jung observed that symbols heal when they are lived, not worshipped. If citizens work together to face economic dread, accept complexity, and share responsibility, the savior mask falls away. The projected hero shrinks to human size. This explains why periods of massive change breed both creativity and demagogues. Change cracks the old persona of a culture, releasing shadow material in bursts, hopes long suppressed, fears long denied. Out of that whirlwind rise artists, scientists, and also silver-tongued opportunists. The opportunist differs from the creator in one crucial respect. He clings to certainty. The true creator tolerates chaos inside and uses it to forge new forms. The opportunist flees inner chaos by imposing rigid stories on the world. Therefore, he sounds steady, decisive, even visionary, until reality tests those stories and they shatter. By then, however, he may already occupy the throne. Jung's notion of the animus and anima, the inner masculine in women, the inner feminine in men, adds another layer. Societies as a whole can exile traits they label feminine: empathy, patience, receptivity. A leader who scorns these traits may gain applause for seeming tough, yet he drags the collective anima into darkness. Decision-making loses nuance and care. Diplomacy gives way to brute posturing. Eventually, the repressed feminine returns in distorted form, perhaps as public hysteria, market panic, or a sudden craving for sentimental spectacle. Only when leaders balance firmness with listening does the system regain health. Jung would call that balance a marriage of opposites, a sign the wider psyche is maturing. But how do we, ordinary citizens, resist the pull of inflated masks? Jung's answer begins with attention. Notice the emotional surge when a speech leaves you breathless. Is it genuine insight or archetypal thunder? Ask where in your own life you hunger for certainty, praise, or revenge. The more aware you are of those pockets, the less tempting it is to hand them to a public figure. Jung likened such inner work to withdrawing projections. The energy we once placed on an idol returns to fuel our personal growth. A society of people who do that work steadily lowers the market value of demagoguery. Education can serve this goal if it teaches more than facts. It must introduce students to their inner landscapes, dream analysis, mythic patterns, ethical imagination. Courses in civics should include exercises in shadow recognition, compare campaign ads, spot the fears they exploit, rewrite them in honest language. Literature classes should treat epics and comics alike as maps of archetypes, heroes, mentors, tricksters, to show how these figures shape everyday choices. When young minds learn to name the shapes inside them, they stop mistaking those shapes for destiny. Yet personal insight alone cannot guard the gates. Systems matter. Jung saw culture as nothing but the collective soul of man in action. A culture that rewards short-term glamour over long-term truth literally trains the collective soul to stay shallow. Therefore, we need structural rituals of accountability, public audits, free presses, rotating leadership, whistleblower protections. These mechanisms act like therapists for the body politic, forcing hidden material into daylight. They will not eliminate the shadow, but they stop it from seizing absolute power. Some environments already embody this principle. In aviation, every crash triggers an independent investigation whose findings are shared worldwide. Pilots study past errors the way analysts study dreams. not to shame but to prevent repetition. Compare that with political scandals handled behind closed doors, and you see why airplanes grow safer while trust in governance wobbles. The lesson is plain. Where feedback is swift, public, and non-punitive, competence rises. Still, there is a temptation in crisis to surrender such safeguards for the comfort of a single commanding voice. Jung would warn that this trade buys relief today at the price of disaster tomorrow. Inflation always ends in collapse. The only question is how hard the landing. He would also remind us that the incoming collapse contains the seed of renewal. When a false persona breaks, authentic being can emerge if we have the courage not to flee into the next illusion. So what might authentic leadership look like? It would wear a flexible mask, a persona transparent enough to show the living self beneath. It would speak plainly about limits, ask for help, change course when evidence shifts. It would invite dissent as medicine, not threat. Such a leader might not dazzle crowds at first. Jung noted that individuation often looks ordinary on the surface. Yet over time, this ordinariness proves magnetic because people sense a solid center where rhetoric matches reality. They feel invited, not coerced, to bring their own centers online. In practical terms, choose leaders who demonstrate reflective capacity. They admit early mistakes, cite opposing data, share credit. Watch how they treat subordinates who bring unwelcome news. Watch how they speak of rivals when cameras are off. Inflation leaks through contempt, humility through curiosity. A humble leader is not meek. She confronts crises with steady eyes, having already wrestled her inner dragons. She does not need perfect control of events because she has achieved some control of herself, and that security calms the wider field. Finally, remember Jung's conviction that every individual counts. History may spotlight emperors and CEOs, but rivers of everyday choices feed the stage on which they act. Each time you refuse a comforting half-truth, each time you engage a neighbor across political lines, you chip away at the bedrock that props up incompetent rule. The work is slow and often invisible, like roots strengthening soil. Yet without it, no law, no election, no bold reform endures. Transformation begins in the silent room where a person meets their own shadow and decides to learn its language. Observe your nightly dreams, and you will glimpse the same currents that twist through headlines. Jung treated dreams as private letters from the unconscious, signed with images instead of words. A dream about a crumbling bridge may speak to the psyche's fear that the path between conscious goals and hidden feelings is collapsing. Scale that up and you have a society fretting over decaying infrastructure or brittle political alliances. When citizens ignore their own dream symbols, public storytellers, marketers, propagandists, extremist influencers snatch those symbols and weave them into slogans. A crowd that has forgotten its inner imagery is easy to mesmerize with bright outer banners, just as a person who never reflects on nightmares may leap at morning distractions to avoid the message. Digital platforms amplify this pattern. An algorithm is not a neutral librarian. It is a mirror that tilts toward whatever face provokes longest attention. The human shadow loves outrage, envy, and righteous fury, so the mirror feeds us those expressions in endless scrolls. Jung warned against letting the collective unconscious flood conscious life. Modern feeds do exactly that, unleashing archetypal energies with no ritual container. Where traditional cultures framed the trickster in carnival or myth, Twitter lets him loose every minute. If we enter these spaces without inner anchoring, we walk into a carnival that never closes, wearing masks we did not choose, dancing to tunes that drain our strength. To respond wisely, bring ritual back to the screen. Before opening the news, breathe, recall a dream, jot a question. What part of me might this headline trigger? When you feel the surge of anger or glee as a politician stumbles, picture the stage backdrop. Are you projecting secret wishes or frustrations onto that figure? Such brief pauses turn passive consumption into active dialogue with the unconscious. You reclaim energy that would otherwise inflate fakery. Jung saw the peril of what he called the mass man, the individual who dissolves into group mind, surrendering moral judgment to slogans. Technology did not invent this danger, but it speeds it. Photos, clips, and slogans hurtle past the psyche faster than it can digest, so defensive simplifications harden. Individuation, a conscious relationship with all inner parts, slows the swirl. It does not require withdrawing to a cave. It asks for small, quiet spaces woven into daily life, journaling on a commuter train, sharing doubts in a team meeting, walking phone-free at dusk, and greeting whatever thoughts surface. Every moment spent hearing one's own interior reduces the urge to grab external certainties. Corporations that understand depth psychology weave similar pauses into leadership pipelines. Some progressive firms now pair rising managers with shadow mentors, coaches trained to surface hidden motives behind strategic decisions. Before a product launch, the mentor might ask, "Which unmet childhood need are you hoping this success will satisfy?" The question can feel disorienting, yet leaders who face it early make fewer ego-driven gambles later. They learn to separate genuine vision from the hunger to silence inner critics through public applause. Imagine if Enron's traders had practiced such reflection. The glamour of supremacy might have shrunk enough for ethics to enter the room. Active imagination, Jung's method of conversing with inner figures, also adapts to boardrooms. A facilitator invites executives to close their eyes and picture the company as an animal. One sees a wounded hawk, another a crowded anthill. They discuss the images, translating symbol into strategy. The hawk suggests high vision but injured trust. The anthill points to overwork and muddled hierarchy. Because symbols bypass defensiveness, they surface truths that bullet point reports bury. Decision-making gains depth without forfeiting speed. Across cultures, the same insight appears. The Maori speak of waka papa, the living thread that binds person to ancestors, land, and future children. When leadership ignores waka papa, it frays. Projects succeed on paper but wound the soil or spirit and soon collapse. Jung would call waka papa a symbol of the self, the integrative principle that seeks wholeness through time. Modern policy often severs these links, valuing quarterly profit over lineage. Restoring long sight means consulting more than balance sheets. It means inviting elders, ecologists, and youth voices into plans. Where all timelines meet, incompetence finds less room to hide. Technology itself now embodies a projection, artificial intelligence as the new Prometheus or Golem. Some hail it as savior, others fear apocalypse. Jung would note the inflation on both sides. We are projecting our collective intellect and shadow onto code. The danger is neither divine uplift nor total doom, but failure to integrate, treating the tool as magic rather than taking ethical responsibility for its design and use. Competent stewardship requires dialogue between engineers, philosophers, sociologists, and poets. Otherwise, narrow metrics will steer systems that touch every heart. Mythmaking, therefore, is not optional decoration. It is central governance. The story a society tells about itself, pioneer nation, harmony realm, melting pot, becomes an unconscious charter that guides policy beyond spreadsheets. If the myth denies shadow, it forces shadow to appear in disturbing ways. Scapegoat panics, conspiracy spirals, policy whiplash. Healthier myths accept paradox. The pioneer also wounds the land. The harmony realm harbors silence. The melting pot risks erasing flavors. Leaders who voice such dualities invite citizens into maturity. Concrete steps follow. Town halls can open with short storytelling circles. Share a time you felt both proud and uneasy about our community. Data shows that when people hear nuanced narratives early, later debates stay civil longer. Schools can teach mythology alongside civics, framing news cycles within older patterns, helping students spot when a headline rehashes an archetype like the treacherous advisor or the pure child. Media outlets could employ resident depth psychology editors who flag coverage that repeatedly inflates villain or hero tropes without evidence. These interventions cost less than one disastrous policy born of group fantasy. Yet even with reforms, every generation will face fresh shadows. Jung never promised utopia. He offered a compass. Turn toward the unconscious, not away. The compass works at midnight as well as noon. When a leader's certainty dazzles, check your bearings. Does their story leave room for ambiguity, for the possibility they might change their mind? If not, you are likely standing before an inflated persona, however polished. When institutions fail and an incompetent power grows, despair whispers that shadow has won. Jung would answer with alchemy's wisdom: prima materia looks like mud but hides gold. A crisis exposes collective wounds that routine life masks. Use the exposure. Organize study groups on propaganda techniques. Host neighborhood dialogues on diverse moral values. Volunteer for local oversight boards. Each act translates unconscious chaos into constructive form. Over time, the very turmoil that once empowered a shallow ruler can seed a culture better able to vet its champions. Personal practice mirrors this arc. Notice repetitive frustrations, a manager who never listens, a partner who refuses nuance. Ask, what inner voice of mine behaves similarly? Perhaps you hush your intuition just as the boss hushes yours. By owning that pattern, you lighten outer conflict and gain empathy for all caught in similar loops. Individuation thus breeds social skill. It teaches you to see the frightened child behind the braggart, the unloved poet behind the bully. You may still oppose their policies, but without demonization, which strips you of nuance and empowers the demagogue. In therapy, Jung watched patients reclaim shadow energy and redirect it into creativity, painting, public service, adventurous careers. Societies can do the same. The energy once poured into idolizing smooth talkers can fund libraries, green tech, or art festivals that give safer channels for archetypal play. Venice's carnival diffuses mischief through masks worn knowingly. Modern cities could host complex fairs where citizens dramatize public dilemmas through theater, then debate real policies informed by the emotions stirred. Ritual turns projection into participation. Inner and outer work converge at the crossroads of humility. Jung wrote that the task is to make the darkness conscious, not to declare oneself free of it. Leaders, citizens, institutions all stumble. The measure is not spotless record, but relentless willingness to learn. Competence, in this broader sense, includes the courage to revise beliefs in the light of new understanding. That courage is contagious. One manager who publicly corrects an error grants subordinates permission to surface issues early, preventing disasters. One journalist who prints a thoughtful retraction raises the whole profession's credibility. Every culture eventually faces the moment when applause fades and the bright masks lie scattered on the stage. What remains is the sober task of reconstruction. Jung called this phase the night sea journey, the long crossing in which familiar landmarks vanish and the voyager meets the deeper self or else drifts into despair. Societies, like individuals, must brave such crossings. The temptation is to long for the easy charm of yesterday's performer or to crown the next loud claimant. Instead, we can choose the harder path, to cultivate leaders who have weathered their own inner storms and can therefore steer through collective darkness without panic. Signs of such leadership are quiet but unmistakable. In dialogue, they ask more than they tell, tracing the outlines of the unknown rather than rushing to fill every silence. When confronted with failure, they do not search first for scapegoats. They dissect causes, invite critique, and share lessons so the wound becomes a teacher. They speak of goals in layered time, now, a decade from now, and after they themselves are gone. Above all, they respect the mystery at the heart of human affairs, knowing that no plan, however elegant, escapes the unforeseen. This reverence for mystery is not weakness. It is the humility that keeps vision flexible and institutions alive. We, the governed, have matching duties. Vote, of course, but also practice the slow citizenship that begins at dinner tables and community meetings. When a neighbor repeats an extreme claim, resist the reflex to counter with equal heat. Ask, how did you come to that view? Open space for story. Beneath the assertion often lies a fear or heartbreak that facts alone cannot soothe. Jung observed that what we do not make conscious appears outside as fate. A community that airbrushes private grief soon meets that grief roaring in public strife. By daring to listen, we help transmute raw emotion into shared understanding before it hardens into destructive policy. Art plays a crucial part in this alchemy. A novel, a mural, a folk song can carry the shadow into daylight more gracefully than any debate stage. Support the artists who explore uncomfortable themes. Attend performances that disturb as well as delight. They are the court jesters of democracy, permitted to tell dangerous truths under cover of imagination. Their work expands the collective dreamscape, giving citizens symbolic language robust enough to hold nuance. A society rich in living symbols offers less fertile soil for shallow sloganeers because its people have already tasted deeper stories at the theater, in libraries, in open mic nights, under makeshift lights. Economic design, too, shapes psychological health. When wages stagnate and futures blur, the psyche narrows to survival mode. Nuance looks like a luxury. Policies that secure housing, healthcare, and dignified work widen the window in which citizens can process complexity. Jung insisted that spirituality requires a certain freedom from chronic anxiety. The same is true of civic maturity. Thus, fiscal prudence and social safety nets are not opposites, but partners in cultivating a public able to weigh layered truths rather than cling to the first certainty offered. Globally, networks of reflective practitioners are already planting seeds. Mayors meet in climate action cohorts that include psychologists to address fear alongside engineering. Journalists form slow news cooperatives, publishing fewer stories but embedding context, bias checks, and mythic subtext analysis. Some military colleges add courses on archetypal warfare, training officers to recognize when an enemy image has swelled into dehumanizing fantasy, a step toward preventing atrocities. These efforts remain small, yet they prove that systems can evolve once people accept that inner life belongs on the strategic agenda. At home, cultivate rituals resilient to turbulence. Keep a dream journal and every quarter gather with friends to share one dream each, noting recurring motifs. End meetings with a minute of silence so ideas can settle and hidden reservations surface. Celebrate mistakes spotted early rather than perfection achieved late. Such customs inoculate groups against the panic that incompetent power thrives on.
And remember the plain genius of gratitude. Jung noted that psychic energy flows where attention goes. Thanking someone for honest dissent directs energy toward truth-telling. In an environment of sincere appreciation, even flawed leaders find it easier to admit uncertainty. Gratitude, then, is not mere courtesy. It is a strategic redistribution of psychic capital away from vanity toward collaboration.
The journey is unending, but each step matters. Every time a citizen chooses dialogue over derision, every time a board hires a challenger instead of a sycophant, every time an algorithm is audited for hidden bias, the arc bends a little toward sanity. The world will not become free of shadow. That would be to empty life of depth. Yet we can ensure the shadow does not rule. Jung left us a blueprint written between the lines of his case studies. Meet the unconscious with courage, integrate its gifts, and let that integration guide action in the square, the lab, the legislature.
So when you next see someone rise who seems alarmingly out of depth, pause before despair. Ask, what part of the collective psyche has appointed this mirror, and what lesson presses for attention? Then work, within yourself, your circle, your institution, to heed that lesson consciously, so the mirror may fade and more grounded leaders may emerge. The task is large, but the resources are larger. Dream, symbol, conversation, art, policy, ritual, and the irrepressible human drive toward wholeness. Use them, and the throne of competence will not stand empty for long. If you found this helpful, please click like and subscribe to Psyche Survivalist for more clear, weekly insights into the mind and society.